What up, though? Webster's 1828 American Dictionary of the English Language. Culture, the act of tilling and preparing the earth for crops. Civilization, the application of labor or other means of improvement. Any labor or means employed for improvement, correction, or growth. Any labor or means employed for improvement, correction, or growth. Culture, to cultivate. So when somebody say you ain't got no culture, it's a reason one might think that. Because at this point, and for hundreds of years, we've had a wave of foreigners coming to take our stuff. And when I say stuff, what do I mean? Crops, cultivation. And because we are currently being occupied, we are laboring not for improvement, correction, or growth, but we are laboring so that we tired enough to go to sleep. Let's shake it. Center for Immigration Studies, Low Immigration, Pro-Immigrant. Impact of U.S. immigration policy on Black Americans. As always, when reading these articles, or in this case, a transcript from a panel discussion, we are bombarded with the word black. We all know what black means in the 1828 Noah Webster's American Dictionary of the English Language. The physical copy. First thing it says is that black means pale, bleached, bleak. You ain't never seen a black human. You ain't never seen a white human. The words that I'm reading are black. The background is white. Dodge the hijack. At this point, anyone who's advocating for anything and they tack black on their jacket, they as good as dead. Impact of U.S. immigration policy on Black Americans by Mark Krikorian, Roy Beck, Kathleen Wells, and Donna Jackson, July 15th, 2024. The July 11th, 10 a.m. Eastern event featured representatives of Black America for Immigration Reform, a nonprofit founded by Black American leaders advocating for immigration reforms that serve the interests of Black men and women, whoever Black men and women are. You black? You black? Roy Beck, author of Back of the Hiring Line, a 200-year history of immigration surges, employer bias, and depression of black wealth, also joined the panel exploring how government policies and actions that have enabled employers to depress black wages and to avoid hiring African Americans. Employers to depress black wages. What's a black wage? Okay, the answer is a non-existent wage, an invisible wage, and to avoid hiring African Americans. What is an African American? An African American is a foreigner, just like a Chinese American, a German American, a Spanish American. I'm not going to go to China and be an American Chinese. If I go to China, I'm going to be an American in China. Moreover, I'm going to be my name. I'm going to be who I am, who my people is. Kathleen Wells, Executive Director, BAIR, former host of both The Kathleen Wells Show and The Naked Truth Report, member of Project 21, the National Center for Public Policy Research's Black Leadership Network program. Again, get your throw up bucket, because I'm pretty sure you're probably gonna hear the word black so much that you gonna have to vomit. You gonna have to vomica. Donna Jackson, Director of Membership Development, BAIR, Director of Membership Development, Project 21, the National Center for Public Policy Research's Black Leadership Network program, board member, the Conservative Caucus, former Deputy Controller, U.S. Export-Import Bank. Hold on for 1 second. Kathleen and Donna. Kathleen is second from the right, and Donna is on the far right. American sisters. On the panel, it says this. The back of the backdrop says Center for Immigration Studies. They was spitting a little bit on them. First, Roy Beck is the founder of Numbers USA. He's the author of several books, but most recently and most relevantly, his book entitled Back of the Hiring Line, a 200-year history of immigration surges, employer bias, and depression of black wealth. Roy Beck. In a recent presidential debate, one of the candidates talked about mass immigration, open border being an enemy of black American workers. Much of the media responded in just amazement that something like that could be said. It can't be. And as usual, the experts were trotted out to say that basically what people can see with their eyes is just not true. This is the case for many people. Many people won't believe their senses. Sir Angus Deaton, a Nobel Prize-winning economist at Princeton, after a lifetime of referring to econometric studies and saying mass immigration is good for a lot of people and it has relatively small harm, he's come out and said, I changed my mind. I'm wrong. I'm busy looking at these econometric models instead of what you can see with your eyes. In a deal that was intentional, the 1880 mass immigration was created at a whole new level. Of course, Reconstruction ended. The troops were pulled out of the South after 1876, and we went through a period of about 40 years of mass immigration. So that brings us to World War I. And I'll quickly just mention that World War I, Congress didn't save black Americans on this, but I guess you could say the Germany and Italy did. But you had World War One, and World War One stopped the mass movement of Europeans into the United States. And when they say the United States, they're talking about the corporation. They're not talking about the soil. So they're talking about, but you had World War One, and World War One stopped the mass movement of Europeans into the occupying force, the occupiers. And so for 4 years, we had low immigration, and 500,000 blacks moved out of the South to jobs in the North because the Northern industrialists needed the labor. They needed labor so badly, they sent recruiters throughout the South to recruit. I mean, can you imagine? Wait, they sent them to recruit, meaning they asked them. I mean, can you imagine today, Kathleen, if the big businesses around America needed labor so badly that they would send recruiters into the job deserts of urban communities around America and be recruiting? But they don't need to recruit now because our government provides them with foreign workers. He says the job deserts of urban communities. There's no such thing as a job desert. Job means work, labor, employment, slavery. If you want a job, if you want to work, do it and make it benefit you. In 1924, Congress passed an Immigration Act that slashed immigration numbers, and for the next 40 years, we saw an amazing transformation of the African American population. African American is a misnomer. We have no idea what an African American is. None of your great grandparents or second grade or third or fourth or fifth great grandparents ever called themselves African Americans. An African American is someone that comes from that soil portion that they so mistakenly call Africa, which is connected to Europe and Asia. It's actually Afro-Eurasia. See, this is the reason. This is the problem. This is why they can't achieve any of their goals. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure that they want to achieve their goal. Meaning the organization that these sisters are a part of, or the thing that this guy is talking about. I don't know if they actually want to achieve a goal. I just think it's sexier that it be made into a lifelong pursuit that pays. In 1924, Congress passed an Immigration Act that slashed immigration numbers, and for the next 40 years, we saw an amazing transformation of the African American population. We know what low immigration will do because we have the history of 1924 to 1965. It ended in 1965 because Congress started a new immigration program. They repassed mass immigration. That's because at this point, we were no longer fighting. They had massaged our minds, as is done today. They massage your funky emotions. Kathleen Wells. Well, you say it's not as bad as 1924. I think I can make the argument that it's actually worse than 1924. And so we fast forward to today. We don't only have mass immigration because America accepts more legal immigrants per year, at least 1 million, than any other country. So that's mass immigration. And I want to say political correctness has destroyed Black America and has destroyed America. I think calling yourself black has destroyed you and whoever else calls themselves black. Because when you call yourself black, you live like a black. You become a black. Illegal aliens is a term used in our United States Code. Why have black politicians betrayed black Americans? Because you're invisible. In fact, I know that, let's see, what's the guy out of Texas? He was just a guest. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He was just a guest on Washington Journal this morning. He is pro illegal aliens. All black politicians are pro illegal aliens. They call them, it's a good thing for they say it's a good thing for the economy. It's propaganda. A significant phenomenon that was true 100 years ago, but much more significant now is black immigration. See? The word play is crazy. At every turn, they trying to learn you something while simultaneously confusing the fuck out of you. In other words, immigration from the Caribbean and from Africa in a very significant way, both legal and illegal. There's a significant illegal immigration now, even from Africa. Miss Wells, it's about heritage. It's about our lineage. Who are we? We're black Americans. No, you a black American. You a black. I can trace my family back, my ancestors back to the 1700s, okay? So we're black Americans. No, you are a black American. We have been here since the founding of the country. Well, if you were here, your parents to the 1700s, you were here before United States Corporation was occupying our soil. Does it matter that our parents, our ancestors were here since the founding, since the 1600s? The founding wasn't the 1600s. The early explorers like Columbus and such, it says they discovered, which means they saw some shit. How you gonna find something that ain't lost? Since the 1600s, since the 1700s, is that relevant? Is that significant? Yes, I think it is. What's more significant is that your ancestors in the 1600s and 1700s didn't call themselves black Americans, and you refuse to find out what they called themselves. They gave you a name. Why not just use that name? Why would you call yourself some shit that ain't you? Yeah, you taking a step forward and 1,000 back. Let's shake it. National Geographic. How Ellis Island shepherded millions of immigrants into America. Entrance through the New York immigration epicenter usually took only a few hours. No passports or visas required. By Rachel Hardigan, November 13th, 2019. 65 years ago on November 12th, 1954, a Norwegian merchant seaman named Arne Peterson became the last immigrant to pass through Ellis Island. Later that month, the ferry Ellis Island made its final stop at the island in New York Harbor, and the immigration facility closed for good, ending its run as a gateway to the United States for generations of immigrants. Generations of immigrants. I guess that's a picture of one of the generations of immigrants. Wow, if you look at some of those people, they look like Native Americans. The Native Americans you see today, the Tonto Native Americans. From 1880 to 1889, it was just massive, says Barry Moreno. librarian and historian at the Statue of Liberty National Monument and author of the Encyclopedia of Ellis Island. Never before had the country ever received such numbers. Never before. Never before had the country received such numbers. I thought you came over here by the tens and hundreds of millions after being kidnapped from Africa. If that was the case, this librarian and historian at the Statue of Liberty National Monument would have said, he wouldn't have said that never before had the country ever received such numbers. He wouldn't have said that because the country had received such numbers, right? Right. New York was immigration's epicenter. Some 75% of the country's steamship traffic came through New York Harbor, and so did 75% of the nation's immigrants. And so did 75% of the nation's immigrants. I thought you was the largest immigrant group. The stolen African slave. Huh? Well, why you ain't listed here? This is roughly 1880 through 1889. Who was the people that came to Africa to get you if all of them was thirsty, begging for a popsicle? Who was they? Who was the people that came to Africa to get you? We's looking at it right here. They was all thirsty. 75% of the nation's immigrants, according to Canado. New York State ran an immigration facility called Castle Gardens. Castle. You know the slave castles on the west coast of Miami, Africa? They called it a castle or whatever. I'm not saying it's any connection. I'm just saying the wordplay. Called Castle Gardens at the tip of Manhattan. But the new Federal Office of Immigration wanted an intake and inspection station in a more controlled location. It selected Ellis Island, a 3-acre spot of land in the harbor between New York and New Jersey. But before it could open, the island had to be doubled in size with landfill. The demographics of immigration had changed drastically in the decades before Ellis Island opened. The demographics of immigration had changed drastically in the decades before Ellis Island opened. So before 1880, right? So even before Ellis Island opened, the marks that supposed to came and picked you up, got on the back of the bus, they ain't even have a transfer. So before 1880, so even before Ellis Island opened, the marks that supposed to came and picked you up, they got on the back of the bus, they ain't even have a transfer. Where once most immigrants came from Western and Northern Europe, meaning once before this, they came from Western and Northern Europe and were predominantly Protestant. After the Civil War, they began to come from Russia, Eastern Europe, and Italy. And they were Jewish and Catholic, fleeing pogroms and poverty. They ain't had no car. How was they going to come pick you up? The U.S. government made it clear that they would not welcome anarchists, polygamists, criminals, or anyone who was sick and had loose morals or couldn't support themselves. At the same time, however, neither visas, passports, nor any other documentation were required, and there weren't limits on how many people could enter the country. Sound familiar? The immigrants who eventually passed through Ellis Island started their journey by buying passage on a steamship. Passage on a steamship. A steamship. The ships they came to get you on from Mommy Africa was big enough to have all the people that was rowing. They was able to have 500 of y'all at the bottom. They was able to have the crew. They was able to have provisions of food for 3 months, water, usually sailing from Europe. The steamship companies were encouraged to thoroughly screen passengers to ensure health, good character, and financial solvency. If they didn't, they'd be fined $100 for every person who was refused entry into the U.S. and have to pay for the rejected immigrants' return voyage. It was a penalty for bringing certain people over here. Ships steaming into New York Harbor would be met by a small boat from Ellis Island carrying immigration inspectors who would board to quickly examine the first and second class passengers, many of whom were not immigrants. Wait a minute. Ships steaming into New York Harbor would be met by a small boat from Ellis Island carrying immigration inspectors who would board to quickly examine the first and second class passengers. So a boat went out to the big boat, the big steamship, and it would have immigration inspectors who was going to examine the first and second class passengers. Now, many of these immigration inspectors, it says, were not immigrants. So if they not immigrants, who were they? Were they the indigenous people? Were they your relatives? Look into your genealogy. Look into your story and let me know if one of your relatives, if one of them had a gig as an immigration inspector. Passengers free of obvious diseases and whose answers match the information on the ship manifest, there are records, would be allowed to disembark when the ship docked at one of the city's piers. All third class and steerage passengers, on the other hand, were put on a ferry to Ellis Island, where women and children were separated in one line and men in the other. The lines would snake through the Great Hall as the new arrivals proceeded through an assembly line of cursory medical examinations conducted by uniformed doctors. Medical examinations performed by uniformed doctors. If a medical condition was discovered, the person's clothing would be marked with a chalk letter, and they'd be ushered into what was called the doctor's pen, where they would be confined until they could be more thoroughly examined. And you already know the men were separated from the women and children, because you take the men away, you take away the women and children's security. And we already know these doctors, these just men. That's it. They ain't no heavenly beings and all that, exempt from all manner of things. You know, they was doing all manner of things to them women and children. They just keeping it clean right here. Once that gauntlet was passed, immigrants proceeded upstairs where a line of inspectors awaited. Inspectors, all levels, all at every level. The women and children are compromised. Once that gauntlet was passed, immigrants proceeded upstairs where a line of inspectors awaited, each with a section of the ship's manifest. Immigrants wore tags with the name of the ship they'd sailed on and the page number where they appeared on the manifest. Inspectors would quiz immigrants to make sure the information on the manifest, including their race as defined then and how much money they carried, matched their answers. If it did, they were free to go. between 1892 and 1924, 12 million people successfully traversed this highly efficient conveyor belt immigration system. This is what Pan-Africans tell you, that 12.5 million, 12 million. I've even heard someone say 100 million Africans was stolen from Africa and brought here on ships, crammed together in disgusting conditions. Men separated from their woman and their child. Y'all remember what we talking about? Between 1892 and 1924, 12 million people successfully traversed this highly efficient conveyor belt immigration system. Lesson plan: National Park Service, U.S. Department of the Interior, Education Department, Ellis Island Immigration Museum, Statue of Liberty National Monument. A letter from an immigrant, 9th to 12th grade lesson plan. A letter from an immigrant is a teacher-directed research and writing exercise that allows students to utilize the on-site exhibits at the Ellis Island Immigration Museum, as well as resources provided by the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Education Department and or the individual teacher. Check it out. Teacher preparation information. Island of Hope, Island of Tears. Film summary. Island of Hope, Island of Tears depicts the long journey made by European immigrants in their quest to enter the United States in the late 19th, early 20th century. In the late 1880s to the early 1900s, it portrays the increasingly challenging conditions in Europe at the turn of the century, which convinced millions to leave their ancestral lands. The Europeans, the so-called pink and gray people, the so-called white people who you see today and call themselves Americans. Well, right here, they were leaving Europe. And it says that is their ancestral lands, but they use American because it suggests patriotism. But it's really identity theft. The often difficult trips overland to Europe ports and the processing, check it out, the often difficult trips overland to European ports. So the trips from wherever they were to the European ports before coming here, before the trip across the Atlantic. You've heard about that. You've heard people speak about when they came and got your people. They was walking people from Angola all the way to Western Africa before you went through the slave castle, before you got on the ship and did your Kunta Kinte. The often difficult trips overland to European ports and the processing endured there are presented. A detailed portrayal of the conditions experienced in the steerage class during the transatlantic voyage is revealed. The often difficult trips overland to European ports, and the processing. So they got processed when they got to the European ports, meaning they got tested, they got They sprayed them with water hoses to clean them up, gave them some new rags to put on. The often difficult trips overland to European ports and the processing endured there are presented. A detailed portrayal of the conditions experienced in steerage class during the transatlantic voyage is revealed. For them, it's called the transatlantic voyage. When they plug you into this story, it's called the transatlantic slave trade, right? Right. Throughout the film, the filmmaker Charles Guggenheim, I'm assuming of the famous Guggenheim Museum. Throughout the film, the filmmaker Charles Guggenheim presents the immigrant experience with emotion and drama, utilizing segments of oral testimony given by actual immigrants through Ellis Island as the majority of the film's narrative, as well as archival photos and film footage. The voyage of a European immigrant to a new, unknown land comes alive as the viewer experiences the hopes, fears, and jubilation of some of the nearly 13 million immigrants who entered the United States through Ellis Island. 13 million immigrants who came across the transatlantic voyage. Forget everything you ever learned. Forget it. But it's hard to when you have people like the following. PolitiFact. Yep, it's always someone wanting to sleep you. Facebook post stated on January 18th, 2023 in a post, Black Americans are not descended from people who were taken from Africa to be enslaved. And in this picture, it says, what is this picture? It says, a dancer throws carnations into Boston Harbor Sunday, August 29th, 2021, in a ceremony honoring Africans who survived or perished during this transatlantic voyage into American slavery. Flowers were thrown in remembrance of their lives and death. I know you get it, but I want you to really, let's do it. Check it out. A detailed portrayal of the conditions experienced the often difficult trips overland to European ports and the processing endured there are presented. A detailed portrayal of the conditions experienced in the steerage class during the transatlantic voyage is revealed. Nearly 13 million immigrants. A dancer throws carnations. These are sisters right here. I'm surprised they don't got masks covering up their breathing system and say 2021. These are sisters right here. These is American sisters. No doubt they probably indigenous Americans. No doubt. But the hijack is brutal. And then they stand next to the chain. Man, this is propaganda gold. Mwah. A dancer throws carnations into Boston Harbor Sunday, August 29th, 2021, in a ceremony honoring Africans who survived or perished during the transatlantic voyage into American slavery. Flowers were thrown in remembrance of their lives and deaths. By Gabrielle Settles. The evidence is plentiful. This woman says, this sister says, The evidence is plentiful. Black Americans' ancestors came from Africa, despite contrary claim. She telling you that millions of people came from Africa, millions of people who she does not know personally. I guarantee she can't even tell you about her story, but she's telling you what your story is. And she's doing it with confidence. The evidence is plentiful. Black Americans' ancestors came from Africa, despite contrary claim. Well, you know what? She says Black Americans. So the black might did come from Africa. You smell me? Over the course of 400 years, millions of Africans were taken from their homes and forced onto ships crossing the Atlantic Ocean, bound for Europe and the Americas for the purpose of enslavement. This is widely documented in letters, ship manifests, drawings, literature, legislation, and other artifacts. Even science has revealed the genetic legacy of this forced migration. This is widely documented in letters, ship manifests. We know it's in ship manifests. We just saw that previously. You know why we was trying to peel back the truth. A man in a TikTok video claimed to unveil what he says is a giant historical lie. Black Americans are not descended from people who were taken from Africa, he said in the video, which he also posted on Facebook January 18th. Black Americans were the true Native Americans, he said. No, Black Americans, Black Americans are non-existent. And I ain't no true Native American. The proper term for what his intentions are is American Indians. Y'all got to get it together. I know we say these words, black and this and that, just for the sake of the conversation, but it's time to kill it. It's time to eliminate the word black. It's time to stop describing yourself as black. What type of human being know they colors and still call themselves the incorrect color? At least call yourself the right color if you're going to label yourself a color. If you're going to turn all your beautiful ancestors into colors or they job, they just renamed us, he said. They enslaved us and renamed us. They didn't bring us across from Africa, neither. That video gathered thousands of likes, but was flagged as part of Facebook's effort to combat false news and misinformation on its new feed. Read more about our partnership with Facebook. Let's shake it. There are people of both African and Native American descent, but this post ignores hundreds of years of documented history and science that tells the story of how Africans were forced to migrate to the Americas. Evidence of 400 years of transatlantic slave trade is embedded in history books, letters, ship manifests, diagrams, and artwork, speeches, literature, legislation, and more. An estimated 10.7 million Africans survived the transatlantic journey to the Americas. A database by historians captures some details of these trips. Interestingly enough, this person does not mention any of those links. Why not send us over there? Huh? Or why not list them right here? It's impossible. I just peeled back that layer earlier in this show. Historians believe the first ship to bring enslaved Africans to North America arrived in 1526. They believe, just like You believe in some shit. Just because you believe in something don't mean it's reality. Under Spanish explorer Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón. In 1619, enslaved Africans from Angola arrived on the coast of Hampton, Virginia on a ship called the White Lion, becoming the first recorded Africans to arrive in England's mainland American colonies. We know that in 1619, it actually says 20 and odd negres, negras, not Africans. Africans was put there later to do exactly what it's doing right now. Blinding the sisterhood rightness. As recently as 2019, archaeologists recovered in Alabama the remnants of the Clotilda, believed to be the last known slave ship to bring Africans in bondage to the U.S. It arrived on the banks of Alabama in 1860, more than 50 years after Congress had outlawed the slave trade starting in 1808. The usual suspect scholarship. It's quite elementary. Some other artifacts give a look into the slave trade at the National Museum of African American History. The National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., which should probably be torn down because it's BS. There's no such thing as an African American. Either you're from one of the countries in Africa or Afro-Eurasia, or you're an American. A wage book dating back to the 1700s shows detailed records of bought and sold slaves from the Cameroons in West Africa. That tells you nothing. A wage book dating back to the 1700s shows detailed records of bought and sold slaves. Could be anyone, could be any complexion, from the Cameroons in West Africa. In Providence, Rhode Island, the John Carter Brown Library has a pamphlet dating back to 1814 that depicts an etching of a slave ship. This person is throwing out a bunch of shit to you that is and not giving you any context. The evidence is as genetic as it is historical. In a study published in 2020, scientists found that volunteers' genetic data lined up with the historical records of their ancestors. The study connected the dots on what countries enslaved Africans were taken from and what happened to them on the journey to the Americas. Do the right thing.